Elena Carter moved through the diner like a ghost, her left hand, wrapped tightly in white bandages, held protectively against her waist. She balanced a heavy tray of plates on her right arm, the muscles straining, but the smile she offered table 4 was unwavering, a fragile shield against the world. Her manager, Marco, watched from behind the counter, his arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. Every time Elena winced, his smirk widened. The clatter of cutlery and the low hum of conversations filled the air, but a palpable tension followed Elena wherever she went. Before we continue, tell us where in the world you are watching from. Drop it in the comments below. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful content like this. Customers in a nearby booth lowered their voices. "Look at her, poor thing," a woman whispered. "He's always so cruel to her." "I don't know why she puts up with it." Her companion nodded, eyes fixed on Marco. "There's something wrong with that man." What none of them knew was that the bandages on Elena's hand were no accident, and Marco's cruelty was a calculated weapon. Watching from the corner booth, an older man named Arthur stirred his black coffee, his gaze missing nothing. To the staff, he was just a quiet regular, a retiree who came in for breakfast and read the paper. No one knew he owned this diner and a dozen others just like it. He saw the tremor in Elena's good hand as she poured coffee, the exhaustion in her eyes that her smile couldn't hide, and the predatory way Marco watched her every move. He had seen bullies like Marco before, men who used their sliver of power to crush those they deemed weaker. A sudden crash echoed through the diner. A glass had slipped from Elena's overloaded tray. Marco was on her in an instant, his voice a whip crack in the sudden silence. "Clumsy again, Elena? How many times do I have to tell you you're a liability?" Elena knelt to pick up the broken glass, her cheeks burning with shame. "I'm sorry, it just slipped." Marco loomed over her. "Excuses? That's all you're good for." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper only she could hear. "Remember what happens when you cause problems." The threat was unmistakable. Weeks earlier, while cleaning after hours, she had overheard Marco on the phone bragging about skimming thousands from the register. He had caught her listening, his face twisting into a mask of rage. He had grabbed her wrist, twisting it until she heard a sickening snap. "A little accident," he'd sneered as she crumpled in pain, "a reminder to keep your mouth shut." Now trapped in a cycle of pain and fear, she endured his daily torment because she had a daughter at home who needed food on the table. Arthur watched the entire exchange, his jaw tightening. This wasn't just poor management. It was systematic abuse. He had spent years building his businesses on a foundation of respect, and what he was witnessing felt like a rot spreading through the heart of his company. He knew then that his quiet observations were over. It was time to find out exactly what was happening in his diner, and he had a feeling the truth was far uglier than a broken glass on the floor. The next morning, Arthur returned to his usual booth, but today he wasn't just a customer, he was an investigator. He watched Marco's every interaction, noting a disturbing pattern. When the other servers made mistakes, Marco would laugh it off or ignore it. But with Elena, every perceived flaw was a public spectacle. He timed her, criticized her posture, and mocked her for moving too slowly. It was a performance designed to isolate and humiliate her. Arthur saw how the other staff kept their distance, afraid to be caught in the crossfire. During a lull in service, Arthur excused himself, heading towards the restrooms but making a detour to the back office. The door was ajar. Inside, the room was messy, but a stack of files on the corner of the desk caught his eye. He slipped inside, his heart pounding. The files were employee conduct reports. He flipped through them, his blood running cold. Page after page detailed Elena's supposed incompetence, late orders, customer complaints, spilled drinks. Arthur had been eating here for weeks. He knew these were lies. He had seen her handle the most difficult customers with grace. He had watched her work twice as hard as anyone else. Tucked beneath the reports was a ledger for cash deposits. The numbers didn't add up. There were consistent shortfalls every week, small enough to go unnoticed by a casual audit, but clear as day to a trained eye. Marco wasn't just a bully, he was a thief, and he was meticulously building a paper trail to make Elena the scapegoat. As he placed the files back, he heard voices approaching. He slipped into an adjacent supply closet just as Marco entered the office with another man. "Another 200 skimmed today," Marco bragged, his voice thick with arrogance. "Easy money." The other man laughed. "What happens when the accountants finally notice?" Marco's tone turned chilling. "They'll blame the clumsy waitress. I've got a file an inch thick on her. Besides, she knows better than to talk." He chuckled darkly. That broken hand of hers was a very effective reminder. Inside the closet, Arthur clenched his fists, the words hitting him like a physical blow. A memory flashed in his mind. A young man from one of his first businesses, a kid full of promise who had come to him with concerns about a manager stealing. Arthur had told him to wait, to gather more proof. 2 days later, the manager framed a kid who was fired and left with his reputation in tatters. Arthur had vowed never again to let caution override his conscience. He would not fail another innocent employee. The conversation in the office ended, and the men left. Arthur stepped out of the darkness, his resolve hardened into steel. He now had the truth. Tomorrow, he will bring justice. The morning rush was at its peak. The diner buzzed with energy, the air thick with the smell of coffee and bacon. Elena moved through the chaos, her face pale with exhaustion, but her movement steady. She was a survivor, pushing through one more day. Marco was in his element, barking orders and basking in his perceived authority. He saw Arthur walk in and gave him a dismissive nod, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. Arthur didn't go to his usual booth. Instead, he walked to the center of the room and gently tapped his spoon against a water glass. The clear, ringing sound cut through the noise, and one by one, conversations trailed off. Every eye in the diner turned to him. "Excuse me, everyone," Arthur said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. "My name is Arthur Sterling, and I am the owner of this diner." A collective gasp went through the room. The servers froze mid-step. Marco's face drained of all color, his arrogant smirk melting into a mask of pure shock. That's not possible," he stammered. Arthur ignored him, his gaze sweeping across the room before landing on Elena. "For the past month, I've been coming here to see how my business is run. I've seen an employee work tirelessly with grace and dignity, despite being in constant pain and facing relentless cruelty." He then turned his steely gaze on Marco. "And I've seen a manager who uses his position to abuse his staff, steal from this company, and intentionally harm an innocent woman to cover his crimes. He pulled a folder from his jacket and slapped it onto a nearby table. I have copies of the fraudulent reports you filed. I have the real accounting record showing the thousands of dollars you've stolen. And he pulled out his phone. I have a recording of you admitting to breaking Elena's hand to keep her quiet. As if on cue, 2 uniformed police officers entered the diner. Marco stumbled backward, his bravado completely gone. "You can't do this," he whispered, his voice trembling. But his protests were cut short as the officers cuffed his hands behind his back. The sight of her tormentor being led away in disgrace was so overwhelming that Elena leaned against a counter for support, tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of profound relief. The entire diner erupted in applause. After the police car pulled away, Arthur approached Elena, his expression soft. "No one should ever have to endure what you went through. Your strength is remarkable." He paused, letting his next words sink in. "I would be honored if you would accept the position of diner manager, effective immediately." Elena stared at him, speechless, the offer hanging in the air like a miracle. Through her tears, she could only nod, a wave of hope washing over her, cleansing the fear and humiliation of the past weeks. For the first time in a long time, she stood up straight, not as a victim, but as a leader who had earned her place through sheer, unbreakable resilience.